welcome back everybody, and this is kind of like a part 2 of the Adeptus Arbites video, and this is just going to be looking at how I actually came up with the base, and it's going to be an exercise in playing with waste sprue. So we've all kind of done the odd thing here and there with it. I generally just cut it up and put it on as little bits of rocks, but tried to get creative this time round, and obviously if you put sprue over a heat source, it softens the plastic, which makes it malleable, and then you can stretch it, twist it, and do whatever you need to do with it. And that's exactly what I chose to do. So taking some pieces of leftover sprue, I applied a heat over a gas flame, which I won't show here in case someone tries to burn the house down or end up in ICU with degree burns. So you'll take my word for it, that's how we did it. But by stretching and twisting a little bit and manipulating, I came up with a few weird ass shapes, which I thought I would then combine to try and make some dead looking thing that had been gibbed. So the idea was, okay, let's just consider it to be something that's some Xenos that's got strange tentacly arms and legs and heads and necks or whatever it happens to be, and create something that looks somewhat organic and apply that to the base so that we can then have our model stand over it as if he has dispatched it in some gruesome manner. And that's exactly what we did. Then obviously on a plain base, just applying some Mod Podge so that I can put some form of texture on it, because the generic base doesn't have a great deal on it, apart from just the sort of the minor sort of raised lumps that are cast into it. So going back to the tried and true coffee grounds, I just applied the Mod Podge and then sprinkled coffee over the top of it purely to adhere, rather than using sand on this one. And you can get a slightly finer texture with the coffee, but I thought, oh well, I've got plenty of this stuff kicking around that I prepared, I might as well use that, and let that dry off, make sure it's all adhered to the surface as much as possible, and then go grab some primer and prime it up. I also left some of the little sprinkly bits on it because it gave a little bit of texture to the model. So just a basic black prime with the Stonal Res black, and then trying to do some detailing with a dry brush, just using a grey colour rather than white to start with. So I thought, oh, I'll do it in stages and build it up, and it took probably about 3 applications to do a little bit at a time, using an old makeup brush which apparently had old makeup on it, and it turned out that it turned everything a sort of beige tone. So be it, it wasn't the end of the world. So it just took a couple of goes to progressively get the coloration that I was happy with, and then just using a straight matte white, I thought I would also add some texture to the dead thing. In this way I was just putting sort of spots as if it's got some form of patterning across its body, which would then be covered over and come through the translucent paint that goes over the top. So just make sure it was a little bit dry. I just want sort of streaky, dusty sort of appearance, so it takes a little bit of application, but it's a relatively quick job. In fact, it's the quickest paint job I've ever done. So at least I'm progressing somewhere. And you can see that there's a few little lumps stuck on the plastic there that give it a little bit of detail. That's just coffee that stuck on with the Mod Podge accidentally, but beneficially, as it turns out. So upon completion of adding all the white bits and pieces, just let that dry sufficiently. And I thought, okay, I'm thinking Tyranids, however you pronounce them, seeing they're coming out in the Leviathan box and everyone's thinking of them at the moment. And I've got this purple speed paint that I've never used before, so I might as well play with it and kind of make him a purpley looking tentacled thing, and just applying that on somewhat liberally as you do. That's how speed paints are supposed to go on, so they pull in the recesses and pull away from the edges. There's not a great deal many edges on this, but we thought, this should work. Let's give it a red hot go and see how it turns out. And just one application. I didn't go back and do any other coats, just the one was sufficient. And then because we've got an absolute mess, it was, where do we start to sort of make it look like it's missing body parts. And so obviously start with the ends, and the middle looks a bit messed up, so I chose a sort of a flesh colored paint to add sections to make it look like there was bits that had been torn or ripped off or exploded. We don't know quite how he was dispatched, so we chose sort of a bit of a few ends to just put a bit of a pink detail on in and around some of the grooves and things like that, because when I was making the plastic I was using tweezers which created interesting sort of crush marks which beneficially look like there's flesh missing from the body, and so I played with that and just emphasized those areas as well as some of the messy things. It kind of reminds me of John Carpenter's The Thing, actually. So yeah, just making something really messy. So applying some of that coloration there just in and around the sort of the central body part. And of course what we need to do is make it look like it died a miserable and bloody death. And so the next stage of the process is to actually try and make it look like it was hemorrhaging all over the joint. And so we'll be applying some red speed paints to that. What I did do, because purple and yellow seem to work quite well, is I did a sort of a bit more of a dry brush just with a yellow tone over the sort of the base, and then applied a speed paint just to sort of colour it up to try and emphasize that yellow, because purple and yellow seem to sort of contrast relatively well, and because I was putting a black Arbites on top, I wanted to make sure that there was a reasonable difference between the base colour and the top. Now finally on to the reds. We've got two, blood red and slaughter red. So I started with the slaughter red, which is a sort of a lighter, looks like there's more white mixed into it, something like that. So I used that sort of the fresh looking bits on the ends that I was designating to be torn and destroyed, and just dabbed them on. And because it's a speed paint, I wasn't too concerned about waiting before I put any other coloration over the top. So I was quite happy for those colours to mix when I put the two reds together. But just working on the middle there to make it look like it's seen a world of hurt. And then getting a little bit creative, adding water onto the base, because when you add the paint to it, it will spread out and migrate relatively quickly, and it gives that appearance of blood dispersing through the ground. So we put a few dabs here and there to try and make it look like he's been bleeding out all over the joint, and then come in with the darker colour, the blood red, over the top, and let it all sort of mix together. So you've got the sort of the dark and the light, the fresh and the more dried blood, so to speak. I could have gone a little bit further and used some black as well, just to darken it out, but I just stopped there with this. This is an exercise after all in just trying it out to see how it kind of works, and just putting bits and pieces on the body parts to make it look like it's been pooling and then running down into the ground. And the end result actually looks like something that's a little bit had it. A little bit of, everyone always talks about contrast, and clearly there probably wasn't enough edge highlighting, so I just went in with a little bit of white just to sort of emphasize some of the raised edges, just to give it a bit more of a pop so it didn't look so flat. So just very subtle light coloration just on those upper edges that are catching the light, just to increase that readability of the shapes of, well, corpse effectively. And that was pretty much it finished. So I was quite happy sort of how it turned out. It sort of looks like something that's been really torn apart, which is the whole idea. Quite surprised what can be done with a few little leftover bits of sprue, to tell you the truth. And once all that was complete, it was time to assemble the model. And realistically, it's just a matter of grabbing a little pre-painted. Here's one we prepared earlier, Adeptus Arbites Arbitrator, and using some super glue to jag him on top. And the end result is it looks like he's standing over something that has died on the battlefield. And somewhat, yeah, look, it worked relatively well. Happy enough with the end result. very small, difficult to see perhaps, but it kind of gives some character to the base rather than just having something that's completely plain and boring. And I've done quite a few different bases just with the gravel and the sand and the coffee, and I just wanted something slightly different, and it adds a little bit of coloration to it. Totally indescript, can't work out exactly what it is, but that's okay. That was the whole idea of something that's been exploded. But I'll probably try a few more of these and just see how far I can push this technique, if it is referred to as a technique. But clearly we all have a lot of sprues sitting around after assembling models, and it seemed like the thing to do, so to speak. So here we go, the end of this video. Thanks everyone if you could be bothered teeing into this one, and we'll try something different next time. We're progressively going through the color spectrum, and we've got greens and yellows still to come perhaps, so who knows what we'll do next. But thanks for taking the time to watch this, and I hope to see you in the next video.